Let go of me, Min-jae!
The rain fell like it had a grudge against Seoul that night. It hit the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Kang mansion in sharp, relentless sheets, and the sound of it filled every corner of the house like static. Like the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. Zara Okoye stood at the top of the grand staircase with a manila folder pressed flat against her chest. Her fingers were still. Her face was still. But underneath all of that stillness, something was coming apart. Quietly, rapidly, the way expensive things break. Not with noise, just with finality. She had found the documents 3 days ago. She had spent those 3 days convincing herself she was misreading them, that there was a reasonable explanation, that Min-jae, her husband, the man she had spent 7 years building a life with, could not possibly have done what those papers said he did. But numbers do not lie the way people do. Contracts do not soften the truth to protect your feelings. And the signature at the bottom of every single one of those fraudulent documents was his. Clean, confident, deliberate. She had come to him tonight because she still believed in confrontation over silence. She had always believed that. It was one of the things he used to love about her. Used to. Min-jae stood at the bottom of the staircase, with his hands in the pockets of his charcoal trousers, looking up at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Or maybe she had, and she had just been too close to recognize it for what it was. Distance. Cold, deliberate distance. The kind that does not happen by accident. The kind that is chosen. Choi Yura stood just behind his left shoulder. She always stood just behind his left shoulder these days. Yura was wearing cream silk, and her hair was pinned back in a way that made her look effortlessly composed, and her hands were folded in front of her with the patience of a woman who already knew how this conversation was going to end. She had the kind of face that people trusted immediately. Soft features, careful smile, voice like warm water. Everything about her was designed to make you lower your guard. Zara had not lowered her guard in 6 months, but it had not mattered. Min-jae, Zara's voice came out steadier than she expected. I need you to explain this to me. She held the folder out. Her arm did not shake. Min-jae looked at the folder. He did not move toward it. Where did you get that? He said. That is not an answer to my question. Zara, where did the 40 million go? Her voice cracked on the last word, not from weakness, but from the sheer effort of holding it together. The Abuja logistics contract, the Cape Town infrastructure deal. Those were my contacts, Min-jae. I brought those people to this company. I built those relationships from nothing, and someone redirected the money, and it did not go into Kong Industries' accounts. So I am asking you, where did it go? The silence that followed was not the silence of a man searching for an explanation. It was the silence of a man deciding how much to admit. You've been going through private files, he said finally. Zara almost laughed. I am your wife, and a shareholder of this company. There are no private files. You should have come to me first. I am standing in front of you right now. Not like this, his voice hardened. Not with accusations and drama in the middle of the night. Drama. The word left her mouth like something she was tasting for the first time. Min-jae, there are financial records in this folder that tie you to shell companies I have never heard of. There are contracts that were signed using my contacts, my relationships, and the money from those contracts cannot be traced through any legitimate channel. I am not being dramatic. I am being specific. Yura shifted slightly. Just slightly. The way someone shifts when they are preparing to speak. She's been like this for months, Yura said. Her voice was quiet, almost sympathetic. Almost. I've noticed it too. The paranoia, the obsessive late nights. I think she needs help, Min-jae. Real help. This isn't healthy for her. Zara turned her eyes to Yura slowly. I don't believe I was speaking to you. I'm only saying what everyone in this house has been thinking. And what exactly has everyone in this house been thinking, Yura? That you're struggling. A pause, a small, pitying tilt of the head. That the pressure has gotten to you. That maybe stepping back from the business side of things might be good for— Stop! Zara's voice dropped to something quiet and absolutely final. Do not stand in my home and perform concern for me. We both know what this is. Yura smiled. It was the saddest, most infuriating smile Zara had ever seen, because it was designed to look genuine, designed to make anyone watching think that Zara was the unreasonable one, that Zara was the problem. And then, with a clarity that felt like cold water poured directly over her heart, Zara understood. This was not a confrontation. This was not a conversation she had interrupted or a misunderstanding she had stumbled into. This was a stage, and the performance had been running for months. Longer, maybe. And every concerned look from the staff, every meeting she had been quietly removed from, every door that had closed just before she reached it, all of it had been rehearsed. All of it had been deliberate. She had not been losing her grip on her marriage. She had been pushed off it. I built this company with you, Zara said softly. She looked only at Min-jae. She wanted him to hear it without the buffer of Yura's presence. She wanted him to have to hold the weight of it directly. 7 years ago, you had a company that was 3 months from collapse. I sat with you at that kitchen table. Not this kitchen. That tiny kitchen in that apartment in Mapogu. And I mapped out the restructuring plan with you. I made calls to people in Lagos and Nairobi and Accra that you did not even know existed. I opened doors for you that would have taken you a decade to find on your own. I did all of that standing beside you, not in front of you, not taking credit, just beside you. Her voice broke slightly and she let it. And this is what you chose. Min-jae looked at her, and for one terrible second she saw it. A flicker of something real. Guilt. Grief. Something human underneath the marble surface of the man he had become. Then it was gone. You were never meant to stand beside me, he said. His voice was completely even, completely without remorse. Just behind me. The words arrived like a physical thing, like something she needed to brace against. She stood there for 1 breath. 2. She looked at the man she had loved and followed and believed in and sacrificed for, and she watched him look back at her with the eyes of a stranger, and something, inside her, something she had been protecting, nursing, refusing to let go of, finally, quietly, died. She turned to walk away. Her hand was on the banister. She was 2 steps from the landing. She was going to leave. She was going to take the folder and leave and figure out what came next from somewhere that was not this house, was not this staircase, was not this room that smelled like everything she had lost. His hand closed around her arm. She stopped. Min-jae! You're not leaving with that. His grip tightened around her wrist. His eyes were on the folder. Let go of me. Give me the folder, Zara. Let go. Give me the— She pulled. He tightened. She turned. And whether it was the pull of her body, or the force of his grip, or simply the weight of everything that had led to this single moment, she never knew. She never got the chance to know. He pushed her. It was not a full swing. It was not a violent shove born of rage. It was a push, controlled, decisive, like a business decision. Like he had looked at a problem and chosen the quickest solution. And she fell. The world turned sideways. The grand staircase, the one she had walked up and down 10,000 times, the one she had decorated herself, the one she had stood at the top of to greet guests and partners and diplomats, became something monstrous. The marble steps came at her one by one, each one a new impact, and she could not find the banister, could not find her footing, could not find anything except the blurring rush of her own fall. Her head hit the edge of the bottom step. The sound of it was horrible. Then there was silence. She lay at the base of the staircase, with her cheek against the cold marble floor, and the folder spread open beside her, documents scattered like confetti at the end of something that should never have been celebrated. Her vision was narrowing fast. There was warmth spreading from the side of her head, and she knew distantly, academically, what that warmth was. She could hear Yura's heels on the marble above her. She heard Yura say quietly, almost tenderly, "You had no choice." And she did not hear Min-jae move toward her. Not one step. That was the last thing Zara Okoye registered before the darkness took her. Not the pain, not the blood, not the fall itself. Just the silence of a man who did not move. She had come to Korea on a Tuesday in early spring, 7 years before that night, with 2 suitcases, a business degree with distinction from the London School of Economics, and the particular brand of quiet confidence that comes from being brilliant in rooms that did not expect brilliance from you. She had been 26. She had been fearless in the way that only the very young and the very capable manage to be, not recklessly, but genuinely. She had looked at the world and believed, without arrogance, but with complete certainty, that if she worked hard enough and thought clearly enough, she could build something real. She had been recruited by a mid-tier investment consulting firm in Seoul. The work was good. The pace was brutal. She loved it. Min-jae Kang had walked into her office, her tiny glass-walled corner office on the 14th floor, on a Wednesday afternoon, with a problem that 3 senior consultants had already declared unfixable. Kang Industries was hemorrhaging. The company had expanded too fast into markets they did not understand, and the supply chain they had built for their Southeast Asian logistics arm was collapsing under its own weight. They had creditors circling, a board that was losing confidence, and a CEO who was 32 years old, brilliant, and absolutely out of ideas. He had sat across from her desk with the kind of exhaustion that goes beyond tired, the exhaustion of someone who has been carrying something too heavy for too long and has just run out of ways to pretend otherwise. She had looked at his numbers for 6 minutes. 6 minutes. And then she had started talking. She told him about emerging logistics corridors in West Africa that were cheaper, faster, and far less saturated than his current routes. She told him about infrastructure deals being negotiated between the Korean government and 3 Nigerian state authorities that would give Korean companies preferential positioning if they moved quickly. She told him about contacts she had, real contacts, people who answered when she called, in Lagos, Accra, Nairobi, Johannesburg. People who did not need convincing. People who were already looking for exactly the kind of partnership his company could offer. He had stared at her the whole time she spoke. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Why hasn't anyone else told me this?" "Because they haven't been listening to the right people," she said simply. He came back the next day, and the day after. Within 3 weeks, they were working 16-hour days side by side, and within 3 months, Kang Industries had not only stabilized, but was showing growth projections that made the board sit up straight for the first time in years. He fell in love with her mind first. That was what he told her when he asked her to marry him. 2 years later, on a rooftop in Busan with the sea spreading gold beneath them. He told her that he had never met anyone who thought the way she did, who saw the angles that no one else saw, who understood people and systems and risk the way she did. He told her she made him better. He told her he could not imagine building anything without her beside him. She had said yes with her whole heart. Their marriage was a quiet thing at first, not small, but unpretentious. They worked together. They fought about strategy. They made decisions together at the kitchen table the way they always had, over cold coffee and scattered notes. She was not the face of Kong Industries. She had never wanted to be. She was the architecture behind it. The thinking, the planning, the relationships. He was the presentation. She was the foundation. But foundations are invisible by design. And as the years passed, and the company grew, as Min Jae's name started appearing in business magazines and on conference stages, as the parties got bigger and the guest lists got more impressive, Zara noticed something shifting beneath the surface of their partnership. Slowly, incrementally, the way water erodes stone. He stopped asking her opinion before making decisions. He started referring to deals she had built as "my Africa strategy." He began surrounding himself with people who reflected his image back at him, louder, shinier, more focused on how things looked than how they worked. And then Yura arrived. Choi Yura had joined Kong Industries as head of external relations 18 months before that rainy night. She was polished in a way that was almost architectural. Everything about her was precise and intentional, from the way she dressed to the way she entered a room, to the particular warmth she deployed in conversation that made people feel chosen. She was good at her job. She was also, Zara had understood almost immediately, very good at the other job, the one that was not listed in her contract. It had not happened all at once. That was the thing about slow destruction. It is always the gradualness that makes it so effective, because there is never a single moment you can point to and say, "This is when it began." There was just a long series of small things. A meeting Zara was not told about. A decision made without her input. A staff member who stopped making eye contact. A dinner where the conversation shifted whenever she entered it. Doors closing. Quietly. One by one. She had noticed. Of course she had noticed. She was not a woman who missed things. But she had stayed silent because she believed. She had believed, with that same wholehearted foolishness with which she had said yes on that rooftop in Busan, that Min Jae would see it, that he would correct it, that the man who had told her she made him better would eventually look up from whatever Yura had redirected his attention to and remember that he had a wife who had given him everything. She had waited. And while she waited, the evidence piled up quietly in the server she had personal access to. And one night, she sat in front of her laptop screen alone, and the numbers told her what the man could not. She had known everything before she walked to that staircase. She had just needed to hear him say it. The nurse's name was Park Soo-yeon. She was 31 years old, and she had been working the night shift at the private hospital on the outskirts of Seoul when they brought Zara in. The official paperwork said the patient was a domestic accident, a fall. The man who accompanied the ambulance was not Min Jae. It was a Kong Industries lawyer who spoke quietly to the attending physician for a long time before the physician nodded and returned to his desk without meeting anyone's eyes. Soo-yeon had been the one assigned to the room. She had looked at the woman on the hospital bed, the careful positioning of the injury, the silence around the case, the lawyer still in the waiting room with his phone pressed to his ear, and she had felt something cold settle into her chest. She had also looked at the woman's face, and she had recognized it. 8 years ago, when Soo-yeon was a 23-year-old nursing student with a scholarship that had just been cut and no way to pay her remaining tuition, a woman she barely knew, a consultant who had worked briefly with her father's small shipping company, had wired enough money into her account to cover the rest of her degree. No announcement, no conditions, no expectation of repayment. Just a message that said, "Finish your education. The world needs good nurses. She had never forgotten that woman, and now that woman was lying unconscious in front of her with a head injury and a hospital administration that was being very carefully managed by a lawyer in a designer suit. Soo-yeon made a decision that night that would change the trajectory of 2 lives. She said nothing to anyone. She did not react, did not flag, did not question the instructions she was given. She was a perfect professional on the surface. Beneath the surface, she started moving. Over the next 72 hours, with the help of a colleague she trusted completely and the cooperation of a specialist who owed Soo-yeon a debt she had never called in, Zara Okoye was quietly transferred to a private facility that had no association with Kong Industries, no connection to anyone in Min Jae's network, and no record in the system that Yura's people would eventually go looking through. Her survival was hidden. The world, Min Jae's world, was allowed to believe that she was gone. She woke up on a Tuesday. She did not know it was a Tuesday at the time. She did not know much at first, except that the light in the room was soft, and the ceiling was white, and her head felt like something had been rearranged inside it. Soo-yeon was there when her eyes opened. She did not cry. She did not make noise. She just looked at Zara with an expression that carried everything she could not say yet, relief and grief and something fierce underneath both. The weeks that followed were slow and clinical and very, very quiet. There was pain. There was a scar that would run in a thin line above her left temple for the rest of her life. There was a period where concentration was difficult, and her thoughts arrived in the wrong order, and she would have to sit and wait for them to reassemble. She did not cry. People expected her to cry. Soo-yeon expected it. The specialist expected it. Even Zara, somewhere in the back of her mind, expected that at some point the dam would break and she would grieve what had happened to her. Grieve the marriage. Grieve the trust. Grieve the version of herself that had believed so completely in a man who had looked at her, falling, and not taken a single step. It never happened. Instead, something else came. It settled into her during those quiet weeks, the way a new bone grows. Slowly, without fanfare, but with absolute permanence. It was not rage. Rage burns and scatters. It was not sadness. Sadness softens and dissolves. It was something colder and more architectural than either. It was clarity. The most complete and devastating clarity of her life. She lay in that hospital bed, and she replayed every decision she had made in 7 years, and she did not forgive herself for the ones made in blindness, and she did not punish herself for the ones made in love. She just looked at them, clearly, accurately, like a strategist evaluating a failed campaign. She saw every mistake. She saw every place where she had made herself smaller to make him more comfortable. Every time she had let him take credit, she had earned. Every time she had swallowed her instinct because she did not want to be the difficult one, the demanding one, the one who made the partnership feel unequal. She had been building his empire, and she had let him believe it was only his. He didn't hesitate, she said aloud one morning. It was the first full sentence she had spoken in days. Soo-yeon, sitting in the corner chair with a medical chart, looked up. Zara was staring at the ceiling. Her voice was completely even. When I fell, Zara continued, he didn't hesitate. He didn't reach for me. He didn't call out. He just stood there. A long pause. That is the most honest thing he has ever shown me. Soo-yeon said nothing. I'm not going back, Zara said. Not the way he knew me. Not as that woman. She turned her head slowly on the pillow and looked at Soo-yeon directly. I need you to help me disappear for a while. Soo-yeon looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded. She left Korea on a private arrangement. No airport flags. No digital trail that connected her to herself. She had resources that Min Jae had never known about because she had learned very early in their marriage that a woman without independent resources was simply a woman waiting to need them. She chose Dubai first, a city of reinvention, a place where new names are not questioned because everyone is, in some sense, in the process of becoming something. She did not surface publicly. She did not announce herself. She took a modest apartment and a meeting room on the 42nd floor of a building that asked no questions, and she started making calls. Her old contacts were surprised to hear from her. Some of them were cautious. They had heard she was unwell, had heard she had stepped back from everything, had heard vague, carefully managed things that Yura's communications team had seeded into the right circles. But they also remembered who she was. They remembered that she was the one who had called them. She was the one who had seen the value in what they were doing before anyone else had bothered to look. She pitched her first deal from a phone balanced between her shoulder and her ear while she was still unpacking boxes. ZO Holdings was registered in Dubai, with subsidiary structures in Lagos and Singapore, in the 4th month of her disappearance. It was a logistics and investment company, focused precisely on the corridors that Min-jae had never adequately developed, the ones she had mapped out and handed to him and watched him underutilize for years, while he chased the more glamorous, less strategic markets that looked better in press releases. She knew his weaknesses like she knew her own name. She knew which of his supplier relationships were superficial. She knew which of his board members were loyal to outcomes rather than to him personally. She knew which of his pending deals had structural flaws he had not noticed because the people around him had stopped being honest with him, somewhere around the time that honesty became less comfortable than agreement. She built quietly, methodically, with the absolute patience of someone who is not in a hurry because they understand that timing is a weapon. She worked late into the nights, not feverishly, but steadily. She ate at her desk. She slept 6 hours and used the other 18. She took meetings with people who underestimated her, and she let them underestimate her, because underestimation is its own kind of advantage. You move faster when people are not watching for you. 6 months after she left Korea, ZO Holdings had secured 3 major logistics contracts on the West and East African corridors. 12 months after she left, it had acquired a minority stake in a Singapore-based freight company that Kang Industries had been trying to negotiate with for 2 years and failing. She took that deal quietly, with a smile that no one saw. In Seoul, Min-jae Kang was not sleeping well. The problems had begun, slowly. A supplier dispute here, a delayed shipment there, a deal that fell through at the last minute for reasons his team struggled to explain. At first, he had attributed it to market volatility, then to poor execution. He had fired 2 senior managers. The problems continued. The competitor reports started appearing on his desk in the 8th month. ZO Holdings, a name nobody recognized yet, operating in corridors his team had flagged as low priority. Except they were suddenly not low priority. They were winning contracts that Kang Industries had expected to be uncontested. They were forming partnerships with the exact network of contacts that Min-jae had always struggled to penetrate. "Who are they?" he asked his head of strategy during a board review. "We don't know much yet," the man said carefully. "They're structured for opacity, Dubai registered. The founder doesn't appear in public." "What do they know about us?" A pause. "They move like they know us, sir. Like they understand exactly where our gaps are." Min-jae looked at the ZO Holdings file for a long moment. ZO. He told himself it was a coincidence. He had been telling himself a lot of things lately. Yura was still there, still polished, still positioned, still performing the role she had built for herself. But the thing about Yura, Min-jae was beginning to understand, was that she was brilliant at maintaining a position and completely uninterested in what it took to earn one. She knew how to manage perception. She knew how to frame a narrative and control a room. What she did not know, what she had never needed to know, because she had always surrounded herself with people who could compensate, was strategy. Real strategy. The kind that happened in the gaps between the obvious moves. The kind that required you to understand not just where the market was, but where it was going to be. The kind that looked at a struggling company in West Africa and saw not charity work, but infrastructure opportunity. The Mombasa freight deal, his operations director said one morning. We lost it. To who? Zio Holdings. Min Jae was quiet. They offered the same rate, the director continued, but they already had the ground-level contacts. They had existing relationships with the Port Authority. It's like they'd been building toward this for a year. They had been, Min Jae said. He said it very quietly, and his director gave him an odd look, and he did not explain. He started going back through old files, old plans, strategies that had been proposed in meetings 2, 3, 4 years ago, strategies that he had approved and then not followed through on because the short-term returns had been less impressive. He read through board memos he had skimmed at the time. He kept seeing the same patterns. He kept hearing the same voice in the proposals. Precise, unflashy, focused entirely on the mechanics of a thing rather than its optics. No one else thinks like this, he said to himself one evening, alone in his office with the city lit up beneath him. He picked up his phone and called his head of intelligence, the man whose actual job was to know everything about everyone. I need everything you can find on Zio Holdings, he said. Founder, structure, board, everything. Yes, sir. It may take a few weeks. Take one. It took 10 days. He was standing in front of the window when his phone rang. He listened. He did not say anything for a long time. Then, are you certain? Yes, sir. Send me everything. He read the file 3 times. His hands were not steady by the third read. She was alive. She had been alive this entire time. She had not broken. She had not scattered. She had not disappeared into grief or silence, or the shadows he had assumed, had allowed himself to assume, had perhaps needed to assume, that she would retreat to. She had been building. She had been building something designed with such precision that it felt, looking at it now, less like a company and more like a mirror, held up directly to every weakness, every gap, every poorly considered decision he had made in the years since he had stopped listening to her. He thought about the night on the staircase. He had not let himself think about it clearly in over a year. He had let Yura manage the narrative, the official version, the version that existed in the administrative records, the version that kept his name clean. He had been very good at not thinking about it. He thought about it now. He thought about her face at the top of the stairs. He thought about what she had said, not the accusations, not the evidence, but the thing she had said before all of that. The thing about the kitchen table in Mapogu, the thing about the phone calls to Lagos and Nairobi, the thing about 7 years. He thought about the moment he had felt her wrist in his grip and made a decision. He closed the file. He poured himself a drink. He did not sleep. That night. The event was a global infrastructure investment summit, held annually in Singapore, attended by everyone who mattered in the world of cross-border development and logistics. It was the kind of room where deals were formed before they were ever formally proposed, where relationships were the real currency, and where the quality of your network was more visible than your net worth. Min Jae had been attending for 6 years. He saw her from across the room. She was standing with a group near the far windows. 3 men, all of them leaning slightly toward her, in that particular way that people lean when they are trying to ensure they do not miss what someone is saying. She was dressed simply, structured black, minimal jewelry, but there was something around her that had changed completely from the woman he remembered. The woman he had known had always been composed, but composure is the absence of chaos. This was something else. This was command. This was the presence of someone who has chosen exactly where they are and why, and is completely at peace with both answers. Her scar was visible. She had not covered it. He looked at it and felt something move painfully through his chest. He crossed the room. He told himself he did not know why. He told himself he was acting on instinct, on the need to understand, on the particular compulsion of a man who has been watching the consequences of his choices materialize in real time and has finally run out of ways to avoid the source of them. She saw him coming. He watched her see him. He watched for any disruption, any flicker of the emotion that he had prepared himself to meet. Fear, anger, the particular wounded look he had been carrying in his imagination for 14 months. There was none of it. Her expression when she turned to face him was the single most unsettling thing he had ever experienced in a professional or personal context. It was not cold. It was not hostile. It was simply neutral, as though he were a stranger, as though he were someone she had been briefed about before the event and had prepared a standard response for. Zara. Her name left his mouth like something that had been waiting for air. She looked at him for exactly 1 second. Mr. Kang. Her voice was pleasant, completely impersonal. I don't believe we've been formally introduced at this summit. One of the men she had been standing with glanced between them. The air was vibrating with something that everyone in the immediate vicinity could feel and no one could name. You know who I am, Minjai said. He was aware of how he sounded. He kept his voice low. Of course, she said evenly. Kang Industries. Impressive restructuring story from about 7 years ago. Your Africa corridor work in the earlier years was particularly well executed. A brief pause. A pause that was a weapon. That approach seems to have stalled somewhat recently. One of the men near her made a sound that was almost a laugh and converted it quickly into a cough. Minjay looked at her. I'd like to speak with you, he said. I have a panel in 20 minutes, she said pleasantly. Privately. I'm not sure that's necessary, Mr. Kang. She picked up her glass from the table beside her. If you'd like to explore a potential business conversation, my team can arrange something through formal channels. She met his eyes for just a moment, and in that moment he saw it, just briefly, just enough to know that she saw everything, that she had always seen everything. It was nice to meet you. She turned back to her group. He stood there. He had presented to boards during crises. He had negotiated under pressure that would have broken most people.